In this real side experience, I would find myself in my physical level house. The houses tend to represent the consciousness on the real side, and just as a standard house would comprise of 2 floors generally, the real side recreated versions present us with the literal differentiation between the physical, personal self, the ground floor, and the other aspects of the created self, the 5 bodies, and the dimensions they operate in beyond the physical, the upper floor. Generally, what transpires on the ground floor reveals the agreements we have that we are consciously creating or maintaining, and so very likely we would expect to see those we have a physical level affiliation with to be featuring on the ground floors of our real side recreated houses. The upper floor, then, is more that which is unseen, at least as we operate from the physical level. The upper floor, then, is more that which is unseen, at least as we operate from the physical level, our multi-dimensional selves and other dimensional life levels of the simulator. And then will be the various areas of the house that, just as it is on the physical, where certain parts of our homes are used as a storage, but generally are not areas where we operate in overwhelmingly, the basement, the attic, etc. What lurks within these areas in our real side homes will be that which we are unconscious of, the subconscious attachments we have with others, and the agreements we hold to. As an example, Duane has shared how an Eckankar member would discover Joanee and Harold lurking in a closet on the top floor of an individual's house, and as the process of awareness does entail a facing and releasing of all agreements and attachments, the bulk of which we will be unconscious of, that which resides in the subconscious. So then, were they both exposed, and indeed with the agreement of the individual whose real side experience it was, would the real guides remove Joanee and Harold from the closet, the attachment effectively severed, as they were ousted from the overall consciousness representing house? What generally happens when we are afforded these recreated house views is that we are made aware then of the agreements we have, and we can rather have an affirmation as to where our intent is placed, for intent is an idea also that will be a consciousness installed. We can also be made aware of all that which is impacting us from the real side, as every agreement which affects the circumstances in which we facilitate then the ability of other beings and body types to attack us. All attacks will begin on the real side, simply due to how the physical level rolls out in time sequences that delay such effects from being instantaneous, whereas the real side has no additional idea constraints, such as time and space ideas, and so every agreement there and in reality is instantly its effects. Of course, we only literally separate the body forms and dimensional levels. In reality, everything is an isness. It's just the mechanics we operate through that present the illusion of segregation, separation, distance, and time. As such, the idea that is an attack impacts us immediately throughout our 5 bodies, but as I said, the consciousness design with the inclusion of time and space ideas presents a delay factor where the effect fallout, although not impacting the physical body immediately, will filter through at some point, and we receive our aches, pains, ailments, and in the more extreme cases of reptilian tap lining, cancers, etc. And so, as I said in the beginning, there I was in my physical level recreated house, though it would be positioned in a curious location, not the usual town where it previously resided. It could be so that this literally represented a shift in the routine design of the consciousness through my relocation from the UK to Mexico. As on previous real side experiences where my house was involved, it would always be my UK street that it would be positioned within, just as it is on the physical level. I have shared also how on several real side experiences I would encounter beings operating more so on boats and various other seafaring vessels, and although it's always according to the context in regards to representation, my impressions were that on certain occasions these were representing the consciousnesses of the beings operating the boats. But unlike a house that is fixed in place, perhaps revealing a rather rigid, unyielding consciousness, so these boats were not as restricted, traversing the waters that they were more a free-flowing consciousness. And my impressions here was that my consciousness representing house, although not mobile, did now have the capability, even more so, to relocate to different areas, as opposed to being fixated in one spot, my former physical level street in the UK. That although my house being fixated in one spot didn't seem necessarily limiting of my real side experiences in regards to where I was able to go, there always is more to see, more to experience, more viewpoints and comparisons to acquire, and a shift in the consciousness, the house now presenting as though with the ability to reposition itself, would suggest the continuing a process of not only facing the consciousness and releasing all ideas it comprises of, but of breaking routine, habit, and perpetually repetitive patterns of action. I would be present in the top floor of my house more than the other dimensional areas and body form aspects beyond the physical. And as I watched from the window, so then would I see a Val and another individual approaching, a woman that my personal self could not identify. They would enter my house, revealing agreements extended to them, and as their entrance would be through the ground floor, so agreement extended that I was fully conscious of, from the physical to the unseen areas and aspects of the created self, as opposed to the example given earlier where Joanee and Harold were only present within the storage subconscious areas of the individual's home. Val and the woman accompanying him would proceed to make their way up the stairs and onto the top floor where I resided. As it transpired, the woman was pregnant, perhaps not a literal pregnancy, but more so the birthing of a new idea, as Duane has revealed this to be the representation where pregnancy is concerned, although, depending on the context, as some situations are literally as they seem to be on the real side. The baby, the idea, was of a great value, though no indication or impression was extended as to what the idea might be. Whatever it was shortly to be birthed, the idea making its effect known. I would leave Val with the woman momentarily, as I decided to secure some towels to assist with the birthing process. However, I had a small window before the child's birth to investigate the environment where my house was now located. It seemed to be a town of a kind, though one of a very basic and rudimentary nature. I had the impressions that we were on hostile ground, as though a town full of individuals who harboured ill intent where the baby, the idea, was concerned. And a little like how we can be shown that which is impacting us adversely from the unseen dimensions of life, from the upper floors of our house. It was almost as though the house had relocated, that this particular potentiality of attack or interference be made apparent, as though the house had zeroed in on the source of the ill intent and positioned itself there, that awareness of it be so. I would be operating now that I would not be perceivable to the ill-intended town inhabitants, as a confrontation wasn't my objective seemingly, more so a scouting exercise. I would enter a particular building, the real awareness dictating the direction for its simulated vehicle, the personal self just sitting back and really like a passenger in a car, simply observing what was taking place. The building selected was far grander than all others in the town, and so suggested the more highly placed individuals of this town very likely operated within. And as I entered, maintaining my invisibility, so what met my eyes would be a kind of a ritualistic ceremony taking place. As a large group of the townsfolk were gathered in reverence around a central figure, a woman that impressions revealed represented the highest authority. She seemed to be some variety of a black magician or a witch, as she would be in the throes of spell casting. Impressions revealed that the entire town's inhabitants were in actuality Eckankar members. This witch then would be a more highly placed member within their organization. I have never had any affiliation personally with Eckankar. I had never even heard of it until I found Duane and the new presentation. As such, there would be little, if any, idea agreement or attachment with Eckankar, the various members, or indeed the current controllers of it, Harold and Joanee. As such, very seldomly have I had encounters with Eckankar members, Joanee or Harry, on the real side, as it is through these agreements and attachments that individuals can more readily encroach into our experiences and vice versa. But nevertheless, here I was, the which, although highly placed with the Eckankar Corporation, would still answer then to those superior to her. But very apparent was it here that Eckankar was very much black magic orientated, among other things, reptilian, associated, etc. Very likely the membership were either oblivious of this or chose to ignore it, maintaining their pretense and ideas as to what they thought Eckankar represented. And here it did indeed seem, as the Eckankar members sat around the black magic wielding witch, glassy of eye, and as though in a trance-like states, that they were completely under the spell of this woman, and were puppets to her whims and dictates. The witch suddenly would convulse, as though possessed by a demon, and from her mouth would pour a selection of insects that were as though a combination of spider and scorpion. All were very exotic in their body colorations. They would be far larger than the typical earth physical level versions, some of which had quite the struggle to extricate themselves from her gaping mouth. But these creatures had a greater sentience than your typical physical level earth-bound versions, as though a body form where the personal created self has been established, as opposed to a form animated solely by the real awareness prior to the formulation of the free will utilizing personal self. More along the lines of entities then, I would surmise, as these beings do have a tendency to assume insectoid forms, especially spiders, revealing not only Eckankar's penchant for black magic practices, but association with the dark and twisted beings such as entities. The entity insects would form a circle. The Eckankar members present seemed oblivious of them, and the entities as though combined the force of their will to determine information in regards to the baby, the idea that the woman with Val was about to produce. The entity insects would then return to the witch and re-enter her via her mouth. She would snap out of the trance-like state she had been in since the spider entities first emerged, and declare her knowledge of the idea soon to be birthed. I had the impression then that she relayed this information directly to Joanee, the reptilian dictator of Eckankar, and although it seemed they didn't understand the exact nature of the idea, their consideration of it was that it was something that could be wielded or utilized as a greater controlling means, reminding me a little of how Joanee once sought the rod of power, as she was unrecognizing that it represented a position and not an actual, literal object that could be used for ill purposes. Whatever this idea then was, and whoever the woman was who was to produce it was along similar lines of potency, for it had drawn the greedy attentions of Joanee as something of significance. I then would return to my house, temporarily stationed as it was in this Eckankar town. At that moment, every Eckankar member present in the town, including the highly ranked witch, would pass into as though a deep slumber, and I had the impression that the guides had as though rendered them momentarily in states of sleep, for they were set to exit not only the grand building but every house and dwelling, to pour onto the streets and secure the baby, the idea that was due to be delivered any moment. As I proceeded through the streets of the slumbering Eckists, I would be joined by Duane. He would ask me where I had been. I would respond that I was securing some towels, but had in fact spied on the Eckists and the chief witch. He would tell me that the guides had everything under control, and together we returned to where Val and the mother-to-be were waiting. However, they no longer were in my house, but in a kind of a drinking establishment, a tavern or a pub. It was as though this tavern, much like my house, was as though temporarily relocated from its usual positioning into this Eckankar town, and Val and the pregnant woman were now occupying a room on its top floor. The tavern also contained a certain number of individuals, but these, however, were not Eckists, and the guides' sleep-inducing actions were designed that only the Eckists would be affected. My impressions were that these tavern dwellers were also of an ill-intended nature, and although not Eckankar members, and oblivious of the idea about to be birthed and its potency, should they become aware of the idea and the potentiality it represented, they would desire it also. The tavern then represented as though the collective consciousness of this particular group of ill-intended wretches, and a little like with my house, which had the ability to relocate, as though representing a more fluid consciousness, as the dark forces in all their expressions tend to be risk-takers. Risk-taking tends to go hand in hand with a fluidity of a consciousness, as those less inclined to take risks are those that resign themselves more so to routines of a comfort and familiarity. And it was as though then the idea was featuring as a situation in the other dimensional aspects and positions. Val and the woman were in a room on the upper floor, but as the tavern dwellers were operating strictly on the ground floor and seemingly unaware of this idea featuring in the unseen dimensions, that despite being dark force risk-takers, their awareness didn't allow that they had the view afforded them of this idea, whatever it may have been, and only if their personal physical level selves are directly informed would they then be keen to secure this idea for themselves. As such, Duane and I would sneak in through a side window. The tavern dwellers would not be alerted to our presence, and up the stairs we would tiptoe to areas of creation beyond where these dark force beings had limited their awareness to. The experience would end there, and as I said, no indication or impression was given as to the exact nature of the idea to be birthed and effected, but it certainly was something sought after by Joanee, the knowledge of it only becoming available to her as she utilized one of her witch minions to determine its existence via the entities the witch was in association with. My impressions were the idea represented something along the lines of the Rod of Power, and the guides and Duane were certainly ensuring its protection, with Val watching over the woman as she was set to bring this idea into a creation.
Okay, wow, what a movie, Kevin. That's terrific. So, heads up here, they don't like what we're doing. Actually, they don't like anything. And so we know that already, so we get to deal with it. This becomes our adventure, and through what they decide and all their nonsense and funny stuff, we become more aware and stronger. That's the best part. And they have a big decision to make to want to do better or keep getting worse. Yeah, and I would say the lady that was minion of Joanee was probably Susan Miller, who is a witch too, who heads Eckankar, and that's why Joanee picked Susan. And I had written a letter over a year ago to Susan when she took over, etc., just to, see if she'd respond or whatever. I didn't expect anything, but they've got it on the real side. They see what's going on. So they're going to do everything they can and try and gang up the Eckas also to rile them up. And yeah, what you saw coming out of her mouth, the scorpion, spiders, whatever, again, those are ideas that, feeding the membership. Those are the ideas that they want, the, really bad ideas that they want the membership to, accept and agree to. And most of them are. They like the babysitting role they're in. And this is how life is on planet Earth, isn't it? It gets more real all the time. So, yes, thank you, Kevin. That's terrific. That's really a good one. And, yeah, let's put that out there everywhere and bother everybody. Thank you, Kevin.
And so, sing the new you song. It is your connection to the true reality, the all is, that the real you, your real awareness, is a part of. New